Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, we're continuing my trek through the episodes of Everybody Loves Raymond, one episode in one season, slowly but surely. We're still in Season 7. We're on Episode 17, Meeting the Parents. We only got a handful of episodes left, and we're knee-deep in the marriage arc. And this is another step forward in that arc. Now, for those of you who did not watch the last one or skipped over it or just need a refresher, the last two episodes, this one included, have that weird order thing. I went a little bit more into it last time, so I'm just going to barely cover it. On the DVD, it lists this episode as 16 and the next episode as 17, but when you look on IMDb and then look on Peacock, their order is switched. And since I'm going by the air date order with that one, that's the order they're popping up on here. Now, Meet the Parents. This is one that was written by Mike Royce, who during this season wrote The Disciplinarian, and is also going to write The Bachelor Party later on. So, he's getting a pretty good amount of work. He's not as prolific as Colley or some of the others, but he's one of the names that's been popping up a lot the last couple seasons, and will continue to do so for the next couple seasons. Now, this episode has a commentary, which I know I haven't really gone over the commentaries that are on this set, or the deleted scenes for that matter. That's mainly because until recently I've just been watching it on Peacock due to how busy I've been with the ones like... Actually, now I'm looking at it, this is the first one since Counseling that had an audio commentary, so I haven't really skipped much on that one. And the only one that's going to have commentary after this is episode 22, which involves winning an Emmy for writing, which we'll get to that in a couple episodes' time. Now, the commentary, of course, is Ray and Phil, like always, but they're joined by Fred Ward and Chris Elliott, who are in this episode, and they have a little interesting conversation. Like, Fred is always talking about Peter Boyle, bringing up one of the lines he has in the episode, his acting in here. I'll talk a little bit about his politics, in fact, he had John Lennon at his wedding and a couple other stuff, but not in a disparaging way. Now, the plot of the episode, the title speaks for itself, and that is Amy's ultra-conservative religious parents stop by, and the rest of the Barones finally get a chance to meet them. Because at this point, only Ray and Robert have met them, so it's going to be an interesting thing. It's a band-aid you got to rip off. And like I mentioned in the Just a Formality episode, we've seen that the Barones are conservative to a point, but when we first see them, even just for the few scenes we interact with them, we see that the McDougalls are more so. So seeing those two come together is going to be interesting, and that is interesting in this episode. It starts, of course, with them just showing up randomly without telling him, which that they were probably going to do something like that from what we saw of them when they found out that they're going ahead with the wedding. And the first big hurdle that happens is when they walk in. Robert happens to walk out of the back room in nothing but his underwear. And they react the way you do it. Why is Robert here? And Robert goes to cover up real quick with an Afghan. And that's what Pat has to bring up. That's Grandma Trudy's Afghan. Of course, they're asking the questions and bring up, hey, you're going forward with the wedding despite our objections. And Amy's like, yeah, we're not. Come on, you're welcome to join brunch. And of course, Frank and Marie show up, and Marie's more the one that's happy. Like, Amy's parents were so happy these two are finally getting married. We're happy to talk with you. And Frank, of course, trying to make just his type of chit-chat. So you're from Pennsylvania. Now, by the time that Ray and Deborah show up, it's kind of gone down a little bit because of their differences. Starting over a muffin, because Marie brought muffins. And they offer Hank a muffin, and he just says, I don't eat muffins. I've never had any type of muffin, which, that right there just has me going, really? You've never had a muffin? Then how would you know it's not something you like? I could tell you most of the foods I don't like are stuff I have tried, and I know I don't like it. Outside of, exotic stuff, even though it is, when you look at the graph, just a couple things away from crustaceans, and I do eat crustaceans, I don't think I would want to eat grasshoppers, unless I'm in a survival situation where it's that or death. Or same thing with a tarantula, maybe that might be a little bit more, but Yeah, stuff like that. It's like, yeah, that I get. But a muffin? Not eating a muffin, that's just weird. But it adds to his eccentricity and causes them to clash a little bit. And of course, since they're not eating, Marie going to her usual stuff. No, you can't have one, Frank. Ah, I got the muffin! And he puts it in his pocket, and that adds to the humor when they walk in. Get your hand out of my pants! But, oh yeah, I skipped over the line that Fred brought up on the commentary. And that is when Frank and Marie walk in, when he's still wearing the Afghan. It's such an obvious line, but it's just the way that Peter delivers it, and in the context of the scene, it is hilarious. Hail Caesar! That's such a good line. It's even in one of my Peter Boyle, Frank Barone tribute videos. All throughout this scene, you could tell that Hank and Pat are not only uncomfortable being around the Barones, but they do not want this wedding to go forward. So it makes you wonder, is there an ulterior motive here other than them coming to talk with Amy about them going through with it despite their objections? Which you already know my whole viewpoint on the formality thing of it. Now, them not approving, I get, but at the same time, Amy is a grown-ass woman. She can decide who she wants to marry on her own. You can disapprove all you want, but it's none of your damn business whether she marries a person or not, if she decides to. You can just disapprove, but at the end of the day, it's her decision. Whether it's a good decision, bad decision. And here, you can tell this family is not the kind that are going to go with it. Now, Deborah comes in with Ray, and they try to help. It doesn't work a lot, and they get into a little bit of an argument. Amy and Robert, once Amy tries to talk her parents down, which this whole conversation, some of it's edited in syndication. Or she does admit that, yeah, they've slept together. Robert stays up, and she's told her parents she's decided it's not a sin, which, for someone that is knee-deep in religion, they might go, how do you pick and choose that? And of course, it goes into the whole pick and choose thing, but for me, personally, I do not see how that thing should be even considered a sin other than to control people. It's one of those aspects of religion that I think was just put there to control people. It's kind of like Carlin's thoughts on the Ten Commandments, but that's a little side thing. But even with that, I just love Pat's reaction, and I just love how Amy anticipates it. Like, don't say oh yet. Let her finish her point, and she's like, oh. And then once they get into the little shouting match, that's when Peter shows up, and he is the one that spills the beans about why they came down there. So are we bringing Amy back to Pennsylvania with us or not? It's like, really? You really thought that you were going to take Amy back to Pennsylvania? Did the parents really think they were going to convince Amy to get in the car and take her away from all this? Because first of all, if you did that against her will, that's called kidnapping. Regardless of whether she's your child or not, she is a grown-ass woman, and forcing someone to go someplace against their will, when they're not under arrest by someone, whether it's citizen's arrest or you are being arrested by law enforcement that is sworn and bonded, regardless of what level of it is. If you're not under arrest, it's kidnapping. And in their thing, like, yeah, that would be. Now, if she got in the car and went along with it for a little bit, fine, but the moment she says, I'm done, I want to go, stop the car, then it becomes kidnapping, and you're holding them against their will. There's other charges probably in there somewhere, depending on jurisdiction, but at a bare minimum, that'd be kidnapping. And it's like, did they really think that was going to work? And this goes to the whole thing where they're more Pennsylvania, ultra-conservative, slightly rural-ish nature, versus the Barones more city, slightly conservativeness. A little bit also. It's more subtle, probably a little bit Catholic versus evangelical. Because I think at this time they haven't specified what denomination the McDougalls are supposed to be, but there's a little bit of that, but it's more of the subtext at this point. Because we see a little bit of it in the other big scene in that, and that's the praying one. And they're like, oh, go to the city, move in with the wrong crowd. Hear that, Frank? We're the wrong crowd. Which, for what we've seen Frank and Marie do throughout the 7 seasons of this show, you can kind of say they're the wrong crowd with a couple things they do. But the way that Hank makes it seem like, yeah, they're not that bad. They're worse. And, of course, them being super judgmental, which Amy brings up. It's like, yeah. And, of course, me watching it, like, ain't that like the religious person to just sit there atop their high horse and judge others? I know someone's going to say, hey, that's not nice. Hey, Just look at a lot of the religious people you see in the news. I rest my case. Now, we go into the scene as they're all talking, where they do the praying thing, and the thing that really sets it up is the fact that Peter sets it up as a pray-off. Oh, you want to go? Let's go. Yeah, some of the dialogue. This is sacrilege. Who made you the prayer sheriff? Yeah, all the back and forth in the dialogue is what makes this episode so fun, and the actors all have chemistry, and you're like, oh, this is hilarious. This is going to be such a cluster muck. And it's like the prayer sheriff. That's a good line. I mean, that's a good. Peter Boyle's character has a point there, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, technically, if you're going to go pray just to prove that you can pray better than someone else, even though I'm not religious, if you look at it, that is something that, yeah, that would be sacrilege. But with all this stuff, it leads to one of my favorite little moments in the prayer thing, other than the opening, where Frank is like, "Dear Lord, keep this in-law family the hell away from me." Fine, then you stay the heck away from us too. You can say heck all you want. He knows you mean hell. Whether I say it or not, I believe that is where you're going. How about I take you with me? That's one of the angriest we ever see Hank get. And it's just so fun because Peter just pushed his buttons, and he got that. And it's interesting, like, even with that, that's the angriest he can get. We do see him get angry even more a little bit later in the wedding episode, but so far that's the angriest we see him get. And Frank does have a point. Whether you use the actual term or not, or say the sanitized one, you say heck or hell, it means the same damn thing. I understand using one in place of the other as a kid, and you don't want to get in trouble, even though I think if you're using hell in the religious context, you should not get in trouble with saying it as a kid. If you're telling someone to go there, yeah, but it's just one of those ones like, it's a sanitized bad word, ooh. But this, of course, is the catalyst for Ray deciding to get involved with it. He tells them all to stop fighting, you know, and this is a beautiful end of it. He's like, I told you don't get involved, Deborah, and you had to get involved. Then he goes over to the door and is talking to Amy. He's like, he tells her no good could come from families, which is an interesting comment to hear from him given how close he is with his family, but it makes sense. It was like when everyone's trying to tell her a different way to live her life there, and he's like, you two love each other. Then, of course, he quotes the Beatles. All you need is love. Love is all you need. Nice little quote there, especially with Peter Boyle on the show. And it does work. Amy does come down and comes out and hugs Ray and then goes with Robert, and they leave and go out for brunch. So it's the perfect little ending for Ray and Robert there, to where they're calmed down, they're together, and they decide to leave because they don't want to deal with this cluster muck on a Sunday. And then, of course, Marie is going to react the way we expect her to react from this. No good can come from family. Perfect way to have Marie react in this episode. Now, there is one deleted scene here, and having watched it, I see why they cut it out of the final air version, because it would kind of bog down that transition after the commercial break. And it's Peter's intro to the Barone family members after Amy locks herself in her room. And they're talking a little bit, and they actually name drop kidnapping here. So at least I'm glad they addressed that, even if the scene that they do was deleted for pacing purposes. And not really much else to talk about with this episode. Royce's writing is spot on. All the characters' acting is spot on for this type of scenario. Their interactions with one another, the chemistry, and all that. Apparently, according to the commentary, there was one moment where they're in the pray thing where Chris Elliott was actually in pain to do a possible torn rotator cuff. But you can't really tell in a lot of the noticeable things in his performance, so there's that. There's not much else to say about this one other than this definitely will make the VHS list. Definitely is a recommendation one, especially if you're watching all the important Robert and Amy episodes, and a lot of them are in this season. And of course, if you want to watch every single one involving the wedding. But if you don't, definitely Formality, this one, and then the wedding. You could probably throw in the bachelor party too there. But definitely, if you're going to only do 3 of them, proposal episode, this one, and then their wedding, even though it's technically 2 in 1. Of course, and after this, we're going into another wedding one, which that one I have to say is also in the watch one. Now that I think about it, I actually forgot because the name is so generic you wouldn't think it is. It is involving the wedding planning, which they don't really address some of the stuff we saw in season 2 when we did the flashback. But if you watch this episode with some knowledge of that, it makes Ray just a little bit more sympathetic than the episode plays him out to be, but I will address that next time. This, of course, next time is going to be the plan. It is the episode involving the wedding invitations and all the clustermuck involved in that one and miscommunication. Until then, guys.